This is Egbert Perry, Chairman of the Integral Group. As we close this third season of Create the Village, I want to thank you for taking this journey with us. We explored ideas, people, partnerships, all of which are working to shape stronger, more connected communities all across America. I invite you to revisit seasons 1 and 2. In season 1, we launched at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, a time when we were all naive enough to believe that the shutdown would last only a few weeks. Listening back now, it's almost shocking to hear some of the nation's top experts speak with such certainty and clarity about a quick return to normal. By the time we reached season 2, the conversations about our cities, our schools, and especially our children had grown more urgent and far more revealing. These discussions remain some of the most insightful and sobering we've ever recorded. They showed us how deeply our communities are connected and reaffirmed what I've known to be true all along, that the work of building communities endures, not in spite of the difficulty, but because of it. And that work continues to this day. We'll be back at the start of the new year with season 4, expanding the conversations and asking what it will take to meet the challenges ahead with vision, courage, and continued partnership. Until then, I invite you to share your favorite episodes with friends and family and join the dialogue on LinkedIn at The Integral Group. Thank you for listening and for being a part of this village we're all creating together. Now, stay with us. After a message from our sponsor, you will hear the final episode of Season 3 of Create the Village.
As Atlanta grows, thousands of residents are being priced out of their own neighborhoods. The Atlanta Land Trust offers a solution, a community land trust model that preserves affordability, promotes wealth building, and resists displacement. With a focus on long-term impact and equity, ALT is redefining what sustainable urban development looks like. Explore the model at atlantalandtrust.org. On this episode of Create the Village.
Hopefully through my experience of getting to $1 billion and buying a sports team, I can help change the lives of the Black and brown communities across the country.
This is Create the Village, a podcast about the intersection of public policy and community development.
My name is Egbert Perry. I'm the CEO and founder of the Integral Group, a real estate company that focuses on creating value in cities and rebuilding the fabric of communities. Talent is everywhere. And even though it may be everywhere, opportunity is not. Nowhere is that more evident than in real estate development, where access to capital, influential networks, and insider knowledge often determine who gets to build and who gets sidelined. For Black developers, the barriers are structural and persistent. Underrepresentation, exclusion from capital flows, and a lack of mentorship too often leaves potential unrealized. This episode is about what it takes to change that. Daryl Jones, Integral's Chief Operating Officer of Real Estate, sits down with Brandon Rule, a rising force in the development world and a mentee who has charted his own path to leadership. Together, they speak candidly about what it means to build as a Black developer in America. The hard lessons, the closed doors, and the moments of guidance that made all the difference. Brandon also shares his vision for a more equitable future, one where mentorship is not just a helping hand, but an intentional structure to cultivate ownership, innovation, and power within our communities. So let's listen in after this message from our sponsors.
In a city known for innovation and growth, Adama, the African Diaspora Art Museum of Atlanta, stands as a cultural anchor. Adama is pioneering a new approach to development where art, identity, and community aren't afterthoughts, but infrastructure. Adama is shaping how cities preserve culture while welcoming change. Learn more at adamaarts.org.
Rural Enterprises is reshaping urban real estate, from mixed-use housing to office, retail, hospitality, and industrial projects, while delivering strong returns and lasting community benefits. With over $100 million in affordable housing completed and more than $1 billion in development underway, they're leading with data-driven strategies and smart partnerships. Discover how they combine asset management, capital investment, and advisory services to transform cities sustainably at ruralenterprises.com.
Brandon, thanks for joining me today. Let's jump in.
Thank you for having me. Daryl, you've been quite the mentor to me today and the Integral Group overall. Egbert, Vicky, yourself, and everyone else has wrapped their arms around me, and I'm very grateful for that support.
Well, it's well deserved, and in the future, the feelings are certainly mutual. So, Brandon, let's start with you. When you think about your career so far, what's that one moment where mentorship helped you approach a challenge differently, gave you access to something that you otherwise would not have been able to, whether it's deal-wise, whether it's your company-wise, but just something that you didn't have before?
Yeah, I say insight into a broader perspective, right? Like there's the old phrase, you don't know what you don't know. And I think you can learn things from experience, but you can also learn things from other people. So getting to know all of you all, I think, one of the first conversations that I had with Egbert, he mentioned a phrase that will always stick with me. He said, you don't want to die of indigestion. And, Daryl, throughout the work that we've done over the past few years, that has become much more apparent and true, right? If we are going out and doing X amount of business development work, trying to create the vision and the future in a very ambitious way, you have to realize what is coming with that from a stress level, from a responsibility and a reputational perspective. So to me, that has been one of the biggest things. It's like, what opportunities do you go after? And if I could provide a little bit more color and detail into what like the manifestation into that thought has been, I remember a time where we were going after a few housing authority opportunities. And there was one housing authority that we ended up moving forward with and one that we did not. I won't even share the cities. But the idea behind the decision of going after one versus the other was really telling to me. So the proposals were due, maybe a week after one another. And Patricia and I got together and we had our heads down and we were putting everything together. And honestly, we assembled both applications. And it was like, hey, let's get Integral to take a look at them. And, hopefully we can submit and we can win and all of the things. Dickie looked at both and she was very optimistic about one of them and was like, hey, there's some good synergy from this location. From the other one, however, it was like an immediate no. For me, it was like, okay, well, they're courting us, they want us to come in. They're saying, not saying the deal is ours, but they're looking for all of the elements that we could provide. And she's like, cool, but are we looking for all of the elements that they provide? So that's where really learning from her about AMI levels and the type of responsibility and heavy lift it would take. If you're in an area that construction cost is high and the AMI is low, and there's not a tremendous amount of resources from your housing authority partner, that is not an opportunity you want to pursue. So, to answer the question and bring it full circle, I think that was one of the most pivotal moments of my career as it relates to opportunities and connecting it back to Egbert's dying of indigestion. I think if we would have pursued that, the depth not only comes from the amount of opportunities that you're going after, but the type of opportunities that you choose to eat. So really attacking that and addressing it, getting, Egbert's initial advice and Vicky's advice and your constant hey, you sure you want to do this? What about internal capacity? What about this? What about that? And I appreciate how none of you all ever tell me not to do anything necessarily. You just strongly advise on what I should consider. And through that consideration, I often land in the exact same spot that you all would as well. So that's what I appreciate.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, and you expressed that very well. I want to make sure we get to what I'm going to call elephant in the room and the real reason we're having this conversation, because as we pursue opportunities in this commercial real estate space, we both believe there are systemic barriers. And I want to talk about that some. Let me first share my engineering background, very objective, so numbers mean a lot as far as how you tell a story as opposed to your subjective feelings. So in this space, New York Times did an article a couple of years ago that spoke to, out of the 112,000 commercial real estate entities in the United States, only a little over 400 are led by African American. That is less than 1/2 of 1%. To me, that is a ridiculously small number, and it begs the question of why. Why is that the case? Because as you and I both know, it's not for lack of interest. And, we get so many emerging African-American developers come to us to talk about deals, opportunities, how they start their companies, how they grow their companies, what opportunities should they go after, how will we structure, so on and so forth. There's a ton of interest in this space, but yet and still, when you look at the raw numbers, it is daunting as to how low a percentage do African Americans play in this commercial real estate space. So I want you to just speak to some of the systemic barriers or challenges that you face as now you're no longer a startup in this game. You've been in the game for a while. So I think your experience will be very valuable for others to understand.
Yeah, definitely. And I appreciate the question. You and I talk about things like this regularly. So honestly, it's an honor to have a broader conversation around it. For me, my specific experience dealing with that has been a challenge, and I wouldn't even say has been, I would say is a challenge. I don't think you ever graduate out of systemic racism, unfortunately. I've seen it, as small as when I was starting 15 years ago, and as large as probably the barriers that you all face as the intergroup, right? They still exist in different forms. Getting a little bit more detailed about them, like how have they shown up in my work, I think there's been a few. The biases, the breaking into the good old boys network, right? Like, how do you really go about getting into that is challenging. I think if you decouple the systemic problem for a moment and just analyze an ability for a person to become a developer, that has a whole set of challenges that are, well beyond most people's imagination, which is why most people don't do the work in which we do, regardless of race. And if you layer back on some of the systemic issues of not having the rich uncle and not having the balance sheet and not having the proper education, it becomes very, very challenging, right? It's like, how do you become that rose growing from the concrete, if you will, right? Like, that is something that I see regularly. And unfortunately, even with the amount of interest, holistically, there's not really enough of us at the table, and the data is showing that. So for me, it's like, how do we keep moving forward? It's like trying to build those relationships, thinking 3 steps ahead of any potential barrier that may exist, identifying what those barriers are from an education and access to capital and relationship perspective, and identifying ways to say, hey, I know when I get to this point, this is a challenge that I'm going to face because of my color. So how do I get beyond that challenge before I face it? That is what I try to do the best of to avoid systemic barriers. I think systemic barriers you can see very clearly for the most part, but even when you do all of that, there are new forms of it that pop up, and You just have to be resilient and show perseverance throughout the journey. So I think I've done a pretty decent job of building those relationships, delivering consistent results when called upon, and creating a track record that hopefully overcome some of those barriers.
Yeah, very good. I'm often amazed when I'm in conversations with non-minorities in this space, and it's, and I will bring this up, and they will feel like, well, is there a problem, or what they'll be so amazed that there is a challenge there. So I'll go back to when I started this industry over 30 years ago. There's an annual conference held by the National Multi-Housing Council every year. And it's sort of, all the movers and shakers that are in the commercial space, whether developers, owners, property managers, brokers, lenders, equity partners, everyone's there. So my first year in the business, I'm asked to go to this conference. So I'm excited. I sit in the very first session, and I couldn't focus on what the presenter was talking about because it blew me away, the lack of color at this meeting. There's, I don't know, somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 people in this first opening session, and I could count on one hand the number of people that look like me. Now, have those numbers improved over the last 30 years? Yes, they have, but not nearly enough. And for me, it pointed out this lack of access. And not just was it just majority white, obviously. It was majority white male. I mean, by a long shot. And so, I often, as I think about where we are in this space today, and I'll give you an example. It's probably better to illustrate before I even make the general statement. I get a lot of emerging African-American developers that come to me personally, come to us Integral, and say, hey, I've got this deal, or I have this site, or I have this opportunity. Can you help me? And we're always willing to help. But more times than not, I end up cringing because it's an opportunity that doesn't begin to make economic sense. And those individuals have purchased the land. They're in the deal. And now it's trying to figure out, how do I make something work that probably wasn't set up at that time, or at this time that they are trying to do it, not set up to make the best economic sense. And I think part of that is caused by lack of access to not just capital, but to opportunities. And when those deals that may have been passed off by majority firms flow down to you, and you get is, aha, I've got a deal. Now I can make this work. There is a feeling of, boy, I have this opportunity. This is my chance to get in. I see other folks that are doing it, and it doesn't really happen. That's a barrier that's not going to be obvious to most people, but unless you've been in the business for many years, you end up in this catch-22 because you can't successfully get in the business over a number of years unless you've had the opportunities. But many times the opportunities that filter down to you, it's like you're looking at scraps. Is like, okay, how can I make a good deal out of the scraps that are here? So unless there's some external force, some mentorship, some capital, something, the natural forces in this space create systemic barriers that make it really tough for minority emerging developers.
Couldn't agree more. It's interesting that you say that, because even on a macro level, like you described, a very micro situation that we both see, they have a opportunity and they describe it as a deal. But I think unless you have the education, you don't fully know what a deal is, right? And they're using the term deal, but it's not really one. They just have an opportunity and can't fully see the potential challenges associated with it. But I think on a macro level as well, one of the things that I've been really, really kind of noodling on is the push for Black developers rooted in what you just described. And I ask that because it's so many new, Black developers getting into the space, and we're all getting pushed into affordable housing. But if we look at the affordable housing industry as a whole, is that what you would describe as a deal in this current moment? Probably not, right? So if more of the majority firms, and I use that term as larger historically, capitalized firms, are stepping out of the space and they're saying, hey, look, we want all of the black developers to come in. Are they setting us up for failure? Is it truly equitable access, or is it one of those scenarios that you described on a micro level just happening at a macro level? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Brandon, and thank you for saying all the kind words in the beginning, but just want you to understand, I think we're at Integral proud to be affiliated with you as you are to us. One of the things that I think is so admirable about the way you carry yourself is that you're not about just, hey, what can I get? What can I get? You're also mentoring others. And you freely share, whether it's relationships, experience, and many times an emerging developer can relate to you a lot better than they can to Integral. And sometimes we're unjustly put on a pedestal that we don't deserve, but we have managed to do well over the last 30 years. I want you, because the issue that we're talking about, I just think mentorship is so key in creating that bridge to help individuals to understand what deals to go after, which ones not to, how to manage relationships, how to build a company, what are all their processes in evaluating a deal. Then how do you see it through? How do you execute to get it to the finish line in an efficient way? And there's so much to learn. And the cycle for this, when I was a young engineer, I worked in production, and our cycles were 30 days. Everything happened in 30 days increments. Deals are more like 4 or 5 years. So you don't have the time to go through a lot of cycles for learning. You have to learn as much as you can without having to go through the pain of that cycle. So speak some to, I think some of the work that you've done as a mentor and why you think that's important, but, also to what you've received being a mentee and why mentorship is so important.
Yeah, that's a great question. As I'm thinking about mentorship, I think one of the things that I've tried to do was really define the stage of the person that I'm speaking to. And you alluded to this earlier that, I'm a little bit beyond a newer emerging developer, right? So I was at a think tank with the Urban Institute at the beginning of 2024. And we talked about all of the things we're talking about here today. And one of the things that I had suggested to the Urban Institute, which I'm proud that they've adopted, was to not group everyone into emerging. There's a wide gap between someone just starting off and Integral, and I'm somewhere in between there. And there are moments where people will describe any and all of us as emerging developers, right? As if it's synonymous with race. So for me, I like to break it up into 3 different groups. I say aspiring developers, I say emerging developers, and I say established developers. And the Urban Institute has adopted that philosophy of status. And the reason why I break them out into those 3 functions, or the categories, if you will, is because the needs for them are different. So when I'm thinking about mentorship and I'm providing it to someone, I'm identifying what stage they are at, similar to how you all did with me. If you're in an aspiring stage, I truly believe loan-based capital should not be at the core of that mentor or partnership for any of them. If you have deals and you're going out and buying bad land and having interest carry that you can't afford, you weren't aware enough of the potential risks of that opportunity. So as an aspiring developer, you shouldn't have access to capital in that way. And I know that's a very controversial statement,
but one I agree with.
Okay, fair. But you shouldn't have that access. I mean, if you have capital and you want to do it, no problem.
Yeah.
But in terms of borrowing, leverage, etc., I don't think an aspiring developer should have that type of capital. That should be available to them is grant-based capital. It should be non-recourse capital. It should be technical assistance is what should really be provided for an aspiring developer. And that's what I try to give when I'm mentoring someone that is coming up and saying, hey, I see Integral, I see rural enterprises. This is what I want to do. And I say, hey, let me provide a little bit of TA for you. Pro bono, no charge, but let me give you some insight into what this other side looks like. So at that stage, I think that's what's needed. Then you graduate. You now have a developer that is emerging. Whether you have been at a firm for, let's say, 10 years or so, and you want to jump out on your own, that's not an aspiring developer. That's someone who knows what they're doing. They just haven't done it under their own flag. I think also there's a scenario where you've been aspiring for X amount of years. You've had case studies, you've worked on deals, you formed relationships, and you understand what a deal is. When I described an opportunity versus a deal earlier, you now understand what a deal is. You've graduated into emerging. There, you should then provide access to capital on the pre-development side. You should provide technical assistance on the operational side of things, which the Integral Collaborative has done a phenomenal job of and will continue to do. I think those emerging developers should also be very intently thinking about what type of strategy you want to go about. Is it a fully development strategy? Is it an acquisition strategy? Is there some level of construction or property management? Like, how are you diversifying your income to be able to be a sustainable business? That's the conversation, I think, at the emerging level. And you still have to take the risk. You have to take some opportunities. It's going to stretch you a little further, but it's calculated risk, hopefully, and you have the right people around to help you think through those risks. And then the last piece, established developers, which is where I would put Integral Group, which is where I feel I'm graduating into. The needs for them are different as well. Who's to say they don't need pre-development capital just because they're established? Who's to say they don't need access to some capacity building? Maybe it's not a traditional TA and I'm going to a class, but maybe there's augmented staffing to help support certain aspects and functions of the corporate office that may not be able to be financed by the developments that are going on because of the industry that we're in. So I think if we're looking at Black developers across the spectrum, the challenges are there regardless. I think the ability to go out and raise capital as a established developer is still very challenging from a institutional perspective. So what does the graduation from established developer to emerging manager look like from a capital deployment perspective? Those are all things that need to be discussed. And I think grouping every Black person into emerging and creating a mentorship program around quote unquote emerging developer is a missed opportunity.
I want to lean in on that a little bit more. I 100% agree with the way that you put context around the need for that technical assistance or knowledge before you go off, and I'll call it get into the game. Okay. And so I think those of us who've been in the space 100% get it, but I often find when I'm speaking to emerging developers, it feel like almost as if I want to say, and I don't want to be too broad in my categorization of this, but poo-pooing on their opportunity because I am pointing out, hey, you need to understand these things first. You know, what you're describing is technical assistance before you get into the game. Mm. So I think a challenge that we have in being able to articulate, whether it's the pitfalls or showing the opportunities a different way of how do you get to that technical assistance. I think there's a lot of quality, not a lot, but there is quality mentorship out there today. But to have individuals or small firms to realize how much they need to lean into that, you know, to sharpen your skill set first, And I mean, it's no different than just philosophically, you're about to go to war where you got to go through basic training. You got to learn all before you go out there and try to fight somebody. And effectively, it is a fight to do that. Many times we end up showing up in places where we don't have that technical assistance and or haven't had the benefit of that technical assistance, and you get out there and you fizzle out before you got started. But if you had that mentorship or some technical assistance along the way, you can show up a different way, and I think your whole path and trajectory could look very different in that circumstance. Many times I think development is over glamorized. People see it and it's like, oh my gosh, I want to build that. I think this will be great there. But without understanding, one, how do I have access to capital? What's the right process that I should be vetting this idea? Who's my team? How's my cash flow going to work? And just how all the pieces that you and I know are very important to create a ongoing concern. It's just not understood. And so one of the things I'd love to hear your thoughts on, how do we articulate that more where it's received, maybe better than what it has, to sort of, hey, here are all the things you have to learn and why. We want more people of color to be in the space so we can impact communities in a certain way. And we will have a perspective on particularly Black and brown communities that will be different than if you're not Black and brown. But it's how do we educate those in this space to, I don't want to say go about it the right way, but go about it so that you're armed for combat in the way that you should be armed for combat.
Yeah, great question. And I think the analogy for war is spot on. I'll try to address why I think it exists, and then I'll kind of give an anecdote to what I think we can do to help communicate it. The fact that it's mental and not physical, I think people underestimate the physical duress of the work in which we do that come from the mental challenges that we go through. So stress is a real thing, and it shows up in a physical way. Your body starts to shut down if you're not getting a proper sleep, and you're not, having positive thoughts consistently, and you're getting to a stage of depression. And so, I'm being a little extreme here, but I think those are realities of some individuals in moments of times within all business, but in particular within our business. One of my favorite quotes that I've ever heard was, everyone wants to win a gold medal, but everyone doesn't want to train like an Olympian. And to me, that is a great example of what we go through in our industry. It's like, hey, development is this shiny object, and it's the gold medal. I want to go out and, be in this news article and cut the ribbon and all of the quote unquote fun stuff. But if it is the gold medal, then we need to acknowledge the type of training that you need in order to be able to win that gold medal at the Olympics, right? Our version of that is what you described, like going out and understanding what opportunity is and strategy and putting in that work, right? Just because you're talented doesn't mean you're going to be the fastest man or woman in the world. It doesn't mean you're going to be the Serena Williams of tennis just because you're talented, right? Like, that was cultivated over a very, very long time. And I think because in sports, you can see a physical manifestation of that, it's underestimated mentally how difficult it is to build business, and in particular in development. So I think if we can create analogies like war, or analogies like the Olympics, or winning a championship, and underscore the process to doing that, right? Like, hey, let's analyze this. Let's look at what it took to become X. And through that process, we can show the parallel of a 31-year journey of the Integral Group, 15-year journey of my personal career that then created, rural enterprises. I think when you look at all of the reps that have been put in the gym, you then will quickly understand why some of those individuals are reoccurring in the paper, especially if they don't have some of the benefit of deep pockets, rich uncle, relationship, etc. There's a reason why those people are bubbling to the top. And one of my favorite people is Kobe because of his mentality. And I think a lot of people realize after his death how much he was committed to excellence. And oftentimes when you don't have a physical thing to point to, as excellence is undermined.
Brandon, let's talk a little bit about that, and I'll call it more of an emerging. It can be aspirational and emerging, but let's talk about that developer who has found the right deal, but they run into the challenge of, I can't get this financed. They talk to the capital partners and they'll finance with equity and debt and say, well, you don't have the balance sheet. We need someone to stand behind the guarantees, or you don't have X, Y, and Z, which again, I think if you haven't done this, you just think about the deal and those challenges don't become immediately obvious to you until someone tells you, well, you can't do it without this. And then the classic happens every time. Say, okay, you need to go partner with someone. They find a large established developer, and after a couple no's, they find someone to say, yep, okay, we'll do this with you, but now I want 80% of the deal. And it blows people away that they're asking for that, but that's probably market. I mean, I literally met with someone 2 days ago who is not aspiring developer. They are truly an emerging developer, had a fantastic deal, and that more established development firm that they went to told them that they wanted 97% of the deal, which I just thought was ridiculous. But the point is, understanding these lessons, how the industry works, how the capital structure works. I mean, what advice would you give to these aspiring developers so that they can understand the playing field that they are aspiring to be on the field and compete with others with?
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, that is the market, and in business, you have to go where the market is, right? If that's the game you want to play, you need to do what you need to do to be in the game. Of course, holding your integrity. I'm not saying like anything unethical, by no means. That's not what I'm suggesting, but I'll give a personal example. So my first deal, I started off trying to get in real estate in 2010. My first low income housing tax credit award was in 2016. So when I embark on this journey, I'm like, hey, let me figure it out.
I don't want to leave that point right there. The fact you started in 2010, but your first award came in 2016. That means you were working we can come back to that, but you were working for 6 years to get there. So that's an important fact I did not want to be overlooked.
It is. And if I can add, we didn't close until 2018. So,
there you go.
And when I closed, my developer fee was $6,000. So for the first 8 years of my development career, I made $6,000, which is terrible. But hey, you have to do what you have to do to get into the business at times, right? So
that's right. But probably not that unusual for first deals and all it takes to get through one.
Correct. Absolutely. And that helped catapult me and put me in positions to be informed about the things that I needed to do to actually have more of a share of the next deal when I figured out that I could lead it, et cetera. But my challenge was less about the 20, because I ended up 80-20, ironically. I got 20%. Our total developer fee was $150. I was 20. And at the time in which we closed, we got 20% of the 20%. So 20% of the $30,000 was $6,000. That's what I got when I first closed my deal, and I was honestly happy. I was very happy. But all of that said, when I originally went out and I was talking to different partners, I was working with consulting firms and things like that, trying to really like get it off the ground. And there was an emerging manager type program. I won't say who had it at the time. We ended up not doing it, but the idea was that they would provide guarantees. I could maintain ownership, and then my kind of development partner was de-risked. because a lot of the percentage goes to the risk in which you're taking, as it relates to guarantees, if things go wrong, who's paying for it, et cetera, et cetera. So in that first deal, I did set it up to give the equity investor who was making a backstop for and on behalf of me a percentage, but my developer fee share was 80-20 my way, and they were getting 20. And then it was going to be 65-35 if we had to do joint and several guarantees. The way WEDA had it structured was Congress Housing Economic Development Authority. You could lead 2 deals and you could be a co on 1 deal. So this group was a majority firm that had construction, property management fully integrated into their development shop. They had 2 lead deals. I was the co. So Rural Enterprises was the lead applicant on the state application. They blended our score. They were like a 12. I was a 0. So our score was a 6. But with that 6 and everything else, we still scored out. Once we got the award, they had amnesia. I didn't get it in writing. And they said, oh, well, we can't do this. We want, my board's not going to let me do that. His board was him, his wife, and his like best friend. I don't know who you are describing your board to be, but I know your board. So he hid behind the fact that his board wouldn't let him do it, and they needed 80-20 the other way. And I'm just like, no, this is unjust. It's not okay. This is not what we agreed to. So I parted ways with them, and I ended up being in a really tough spot because the tax credit equity pricing dropped from $1.05 to 80-something cent at the time. We landed at 90 cents. But all of that to say, I pivoted from a commitment that was then reneged upon, more so because it was unjust than the actual place in which I landed, which was 80-20 anyway, with someone that was equitable. And I care more about the principle than I did the actual dollar amount. And for that reason, I couldn't work with that group and I would never work with them again. So yes, that is the market. That is my personal shared experience, but sometimes you got to do what you got to do.
That's awesome. Brandon, let me ask you this, and thank you for sharing your story and the challenges, your 14 years in the business, CEO of Rural Enterprises. What's next for Brandon Rule? Where do you go from here?
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, my ultimate goal since I've been young I have 2 major goals. So it's 1, to become a billionaire. That is a goal of mine. I don't stray away from it. And then 2 is to purchase a sports team. I want to be the majority owner of a sports team, and I want to develop all of the real estate, including the stadium around it. That is like, I made it. In order to get there, there's a long, long, long journey that I'm far, far, far away from. So really it's identifying what that path looks like for me. At 36, I can think about this in, segments, right? What does the next 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years look like? And I have to date spent the last 15 years on trying to sharpen my pencil of knowledge. And God willing, I then can spend the next 15 to 30 on compounding the interest, for lack of a better term, on the knowledge in which I've gained.
Yeah.
So hopefully that is us, developing the 3,000 units that we have in our pipeline together, which includes 2 $50 million choice neighborhood implementation grants, and me learn from you all's model of mixed income, mixed use housing that has really set precedence for the entire country. I want to take that. I want to identify ways to really diversify and get into acquisitions. And through the acquisition experience, I think there's an ability for me to kind of graduate into that emerging manager status that, you all are in, some of the established developers are in. Hopefully I can get into the private equity space and really be more of a capital allocator than just a operator, which one is not better than the other. It's just what I see my path evolving to. So I want to be really clear. I don't think people that go and do fund management are better than developer operators. I don't think developer operators are better than people that go into fund management. But I think the blend between the two provides a really unique opportunity to scale and to grow, and for a black man with, a black wife and a black family. I really want to represent what I claim, which is the inner city. Like you and I are from very, I think Baltimore and Milwaukee are very similar places in terms of how we are raised. And I want to provide that, spark and change and growth for the future Daryls, the future Brandons, the future Vickies of the world that are coming up, in these inner cities and looking for things to aspire to well beyond, singing, dribbling, and dancing. That, again, there's nothing wrong with that, but I think there's an overemphasis on that. And hopefully through my experience of getting to $1 billion and buying a sports team, I can help change the lives of the Black and brown communities across the country, both in the physical work that we do, but also in the mental side of things, the sociology of things, to be able to help catapult them to be even better than me. I can truly say, Daryl Jones, your primary goal is to get rural enterprises to be at a minimum of what Integral is and beyond that. And you show that on a daily basis. And it's very unselfish of you. And I can't wait to hopefully achieve that goal, to surpass that goal in a very respectful manner. And hopefully build up the next generation to surpass whatever rural enterprises ends up being and whatever Integral ends up being. Even as Integral continues to grow and rural continues to grow, I hope whoever's coming behind it becomes even bigger than us and has the same mind frame and mindset that we have as well. So that's what's next for me.
I greatly appreciate your openness and the real sincerity in your response, affecting communities, the type of communities, the Black and brown communities in cities like Milwaukee and like Baltimore is extremely important. I want to highlight the point that you made about being on the developer operator side as well as the equity side. We need people like you in both. We really do. I mean, one of the first lessons you learn in this business is that if you don't have capital, it's all just a bunch of wah, 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 wah. I mean, it's not going to happen unless capital is there, which means the economics of the deals have to make sense. Anytime I'm talking to aspiring developers, I tell, look, you can learn the design, you can learn the process, you can learn to look at sites, but you cannot spend enough time on understanding the economics of these deals. And that's the way, irrespective of what side of the table you're on, you need to understand how all the sides work. Unless you really understand the economics of the deal, you can't I feel like, be a true developer, and you can't have true impact.
For sure.
Because one of the challenges we have is how do we navigate as macroeconomics change around us? How do you navigate, after COVID, where construction costs go unprecedented highs and interest rates go up, insurance costs go up, and cost personnel go up, and rents go up a little bit, and now your equation is completely thrown off. If you have that conversation and someone give you the deer in the eye, like, what are you talking about? Then they can't possibly understand the economics of the deal. But understanding those factors in any given macroeconomic environment is what informs you how to navigate. It's that on top of the politics, on top of your partners, on top of your capital, and all those things and how those pieces fit together. And I'm proud to say you have a really good grip on how those things work. And you marry that with your interpersonal skills. I just, the future could not be brighter for you. I am happy, and I'll speak for Integral. We're happy to participate in some small part in moving you along your journey. And I hope our relationship goes on for years and years. So I'm just as proud of you as you are to be affiliated, with us. So I want to thank you sincerely on behalf of the whole Integral team for sharing your experiences and your perspective. It's been a privilege to see your growth firsthand and to hear how you're, taking what you learned and how you're using it. It's not one of those approaches where you're saying, hey, let me figure out how to get mine, and then some years later, I'm going to reach back and help somebody else. I see you reaching back all the time and doing that. And that just speaks to, to who you are and your character. But to our listeners, thank you for being a part of this conversation. Mentorship isn't just about creating success for one person. It's about creating opportunities for everyone. It's about breaking down barriers, addressing inequities, and building something stronger together, something that lives beyond all of us. Let's keep these conversations going.
Daryl, I've taken some time to reflect on your conversation with Brandon. A lot of it is personal. A lot of it reminds me of both times past and current day. And it brought a lot into focus. And having to hear Brandon sort of talk about the pressures that developers face, and I know it's genuine. You can tell he's not guessing. He's speaking from his heartfelt experience. He's seen the deals that don't pencil. And, I have a saying that I'm not sure who I stole it from, but it says that without a strategic plan, temptations look like opportunities. And so not only has he seen the deals that don't pencil, the ones that look like opportunities but carry too much risk is also what he has seen. And unless he understands what he's looking at, he'll think those are real opportunities instead of realizing that he's stepping into something that's extremely risky. And he is learning how to move with discipline as he matures.
And I think you're exactly right. And thinking about my conversation with him, first of all, it makes me reflect on kind of how it was for me in the beginning. And I think one of the things with Brandon I really appreciate is that he is true to himself on the challenges that face him. Not in a way in which he's complaining or whining, but in a way where it's, okay, here's the plan, Phil. How do I navigate inside of it? And I think one of the lessons that he has learned is that, one, he has the intellect, and two, he has the discipline of knowing how to say no. As we know, one of the biggest mistakes that you can make is taking on a bad deal that you should never have taken on from the beginning. And many times when you're a new developer, that muscle and developing that muscle of how and when you should say no is not an easy thing to do. And I, really appreciate that he feels like he has learned that, some through School of Hard Knocks, but he is where he is now and trying to figure out how to navigate to go forward.
Yeah, and you said something there, when you're new, and it's true, when you don't have the experience and you're just glad that a deal makes its way to your table, not realizing that it's on your table for a reason. The other people that have more sense have long since said, no, I'm not, less than not more sense. How about more experience? Have long since said, oh, hell no, I don't want to prove it, that deal. But a young upstart is just so glad that they have a deal that they're going to take it on. And for them, it's the holy grail. It's what they wish for, and here it is, not realizing that it's really a crappy deal. And so what he did was call out a hard truth, because let's face it, a lot of people could be asking the question, well, okay, we're talking about all of these things, but if you have the experience, you know what you're doing, you don't have to worry about this. And why is this a big issue? Truth be told, there is very little legacy in our communities on which to draw. So very little legacy to draw on. We don't have the generations of experience or whatever. We're new to the table, new to the game. And so he called out a very hard truth, and it's something that I have appreciated over the years, and that is a lot of deals that come our way have already been passed over by the buddy of the person who bought the deal, or the developer that has more choice and is able to say, no, I don't want that mess. And if we're not careful, we step into situations that look like progress, but they're really setups. And I would say that's really what maturity brings. That's why maturity matters, because you can discern between good and garbage, right?
That's exactly right. And you used I think, a really good term for that, legacy. In our community, it really doesn't exist. So if you don't have some mentoring, some training from those who went before you are so much more likely to make that mistake of grabbing and gravitating to that bad deal, because you don't see that many. And so, like you said, you get so excited because, oh, I got a deal. And so let me figure out how to make this deal work instead of first thinking, does this deal make sense for me to pursue?
Yes. And I like the way he helped you to think about who is across the table from you. It's a structure he sort of put out there. It's the aspiring developer. It's the emerging developer. So there are those that wish for, there are those that are in it and they're growing up. And then there are those that are more established or mature. And I like that. It's not just neat categorization. It really forces us to be precise about what different people need and when, depending on where they are on that spectrum of aspiring, emerging, or established.
It's a great way of showing self-awareness of where he was in his growth and his trajectory. Because if you don't understand that, you're more likely to gravitate to the wrong partners, to use the wrong tools, which will lead to not being capitalized the way you should, or not partnering the right way. So that to me is a critical first step to understand, what you need, not just from a technical development standpoint, but also what partner you need, what training am I lacking, what back office infrastructure do I need based off of where I am today.
Now, you know what this reminds me of? It brings me to my two favorite words in business, especially in the real estate business, the words market permission.
Yes.
And this makes me think of a lot of people will understand it when I explain it, and very few will not understand it at all. And that's a subject for another day for them. But many of us, most of us, entering into business do not have market permission. In other words, the marketplace does not give us permission to be at the table. And this market permission is not some very precise, organized, or structured something. There's no market saying, okay, go ahead. It's the way people, institutions, processes, organizations, etc., relate to you. And they send you the clear message, you are not appropriately in this room. You don't belong here. And you don't therefore have market permission to sit at this table. And how do you get market permission? The people who have market permission know they have market permission. They walk in the room with a whole lot of confidence because the marketplace has already told them, yeah, come on in. You want a loan? Yeah, we'll talk to you. Come sit down here. Let's talk about your business, etc., etc. Or, yeah, you're looking at this project. Let's talk about it. Maybe a great project for you. That's a different dynamic than when you walk in and you know that the person sitting behind that desk is there saying, what the hell are they doing in this room?
Absolutely.
And they don't have to say that, but you can tell that you don't have market permission. And it's always hard to explain, right? For the people who never have to confront it, they don't know what they don't know. So there are a group of people out there listening that understand absolutely clearly exactly what I'm saying when I say market permission.
Yeah, and Egbert, expound upon that a little bit, because we're really talking about a challenge that if you are black or brown, that we really feel and we see it and we know it. So
Yeah.
expound upon that a little bit more for those who it may not be as clear to them.
Yeah, well, I will. I mean, without going too far afield, it's often, I think, administered in a very unconscious way.
Yep.
The people not giving you market permission don't necessarily know they're denying you market permission. They're not accustomed to seeing you there because there are not a lot of us there. And so it's, if I went out tomorrow for a hockey team and I walked out there all dressed up, ready, and go out on the ice, everybody will look at me strangely. What the hell is he doing here? I won't look as though I belong. And you think about it, you don't have to go back far to understand that we are generationally 2 generations out of some kind of lesser state, pre-civil rights. And if you go back a little bit before that, we're only 3 or 4 generations out of enslavement or bondage. So there is no legacy, generational legacy of us being at the table. And so I'm not offended by people not accustomed to seeing us at the table. It's common sense, it's understandable because we haven't been at the table, which therefore means that the marketplace doesn't automatically give us permission to be. And we have to work a little harder, show up a little more consistently in larger numbers before it becomes normal and understandable that, oh, these folks or folks that look like them are at this table all the time. They belong here, etc., etc., etc. And real estate, as you know, has a lot of ways to make sure they limit how many of us can get to the table, not the least of which is access to capital.
That's right. And Egbert, as I'm listening to you talk about this, what comes to mind for me, my entry into this marketplace, into this industry, the first National Multi-Housing Council meeting that I went to. So this is early 90s, circa early 90s. Go to this meeting. I'm excited. I'm fired up to be in this new industry. And we are in the opening session. And for the life of me, I could not focus on what the speaker was saying, because as I looked out over the audience, I saw the sea of white faces. There was probably 12 to 1,400 individuals in this meeting. I literally got up out of my seat and went to the side so I could count the number of other black faces. And there were 4 African Americans in that room. I'm counting myself in that 4. And so when you talk about market permission, you know, we're showing up and we look different in that space. And that has been a challenge, in addition to the capital legacy, the training, the back office infrastructure, all those things that others probably take for granted, but certainly advantages that they have that we do.
That's right. And quite frankly, Daryl, the thing that I was most impressed about in the conversation with Brandon, it is that he is not out there waiting for, okay, when I get to such and such a stage, I'm going to start reaching back and doing my piece and so on. He understands that no matter which one of those stages he is in, he has something to impart on somebody or firm, a developer, a firm, whatever, that is junior to him. So he is pulling people forward, not waiting to reach the finish line before he looks back. He's basically mentoring none. and quietly and steadily. And that tells you a lot about him, the kind of person he is, and what his priorities are.
Yeah. And that's the part about Brandon I just absolutely love about him. It is in his DNA, that character trait that he's always looking to reach back. Again, it doesn't matter sort of where he is. Many will look at it and say, oh, well, I've got to reach a certain point and then I can turn around and figure out how I can help others. He knows this is a journey. And while he's on that journey and while he's reaching forward, he is continually reaching back. It is really genuine with him. A lot to admire. Says honestly a lot about his parents and the way he was raised. They instilled those values in him, and I really admire it for that.
Yeah, you may even say you helped to mentor him and bring some of that in, right? No,
very, very little bit. I'll take credit for 0.2% of that.
So, but he does remind us that talent alone is not what carries the day, right? It really does matter what judgment you have, right? Judgment matters. And in this business, it's important to know when to step in and when to hold back and when to bring others with you. And all of that is not just strategy. It's stewardship. You see yourself in a position of you've been given something, whether it's opportunity, whether it's whatever, and you owe it to those that gave or poured into you to pour into others. And that's how I think of what he was communicating, and that's stewardship. And that's how we build something that really does last, because it's generational and it's throughout.
Yeah, completely agreed.
So Daryl, that was good. It was enlightening. It was something that many of us can relate to because we've been on that journey at some stage for a long time. And I appreciate you spending the time with Brandon and having that conversation and for steering it in a way that was candid and unflinching. And I have deep respect once again for Brandon for speaking from experience, not theory, and showing what it means to lead with conviction and a commitment to bring others along with him. So I hope that this was the experience for the audience that I think it will be. I think it was refreshing, and I just want to thank you once again and thank Brandon.
Create the Village is produced by Felicia Ann Rosenuha and Chantrell Brewer. Executive producer Rick White. It's edited by Brennan Robinson. Create the Village is a production of the Integral Group LLC, copyright 2025.